trade, quite a knowledgeable man. He knows all the ways in which this country has had to deal with embargo. Thank you so much for being here. So, friendship, solidarity, it should be something off the limits for the sanctions, for aggressive measures. However, one of the purposes of the strategy of the U.S. has been to deteriorate the image of Cuba around the world and to break up the links with international solidarity organizations, with the international left. How hard has been this work for you at the Institute in these last years, in which we can say that the situation between the two countries are probably in one of the worst moments of our history?
Well, I would say that, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I would say that there is many individuals in the United States that understand what the government of the United States is doing to Cuba. And I would argue that what the United States government is doing to Cuba, or the U.S. government getting away with doing that to Cuba, is because the United States people, or most of the United States people, they're not aware of that. And I'm a proven fact or truth that when the United States people realizes that an injustice is done, they're people of good nature, and they naturally support a call to end that injustice. I'm a proven fact that that is the case. So I understand that one of the things that is needed is broadcast like this, and any effort to help the United States people know what goes on with Cuba, what the United States government does to Cuba. And here in this room, we have friends sitting here listening to us. Some of them will probably speak to the audience, both the live audience here and the people that are following the broadcast, and that are very experienced and seasoned activists in helping the United States government feel the pressure and conveying to the United States population what the reality is of what the U.S. government does to Cuba. I want to go back a little bit, because we're talking here about embargo and blockade, and as you were presenting the show, we listened to our Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro, saying that even beyond a blockade, or is even the injustice and the criminal perspective of the blockade, it goes beyond being an economic blockade. It's an economic war. And we had here Ambassador Carlos Fernandez de Cosio explaining in detail how the U.S. government goes around the world pressuring other countries, pressuring different companies not to do business with Cuba, making them understand the cost for them to do business with Cuba regarding the United States. And of course, the United States is still the biggest economy in the world, and most companies want to be in good terms with the United States in order to do business there. So it goes beyond the web of laws and regulations that entail the blockade. It's an economic war. If the State Department goes to or in Germany or in any other part of the world to pressure them not to do business with Cuba, or as we had, we heard of a couple of days ago, a bank in Belgium that was unable to make a payment for a group of members of European Parliament to come to Cuba. It is an economic war. If the United States government goes around the world trying to prevent ships from coming to Cuba to bring the oil that is needed for our economy to work, or our hospitals to tend to the people that are sick, or to our houses or to be lighted. It is an economic war. So I wanted to go back to that and make a distinction, because it is the way Fidel presented. And I think it was quite right to present it that way. And it needs to be understood by the American people and by the world. That is really a way of trying to strangle the Cuban economy any way possible and under any circumstances. And the proof is, as Ambassador said it, that during the COVID-19 struggle, not only in Cuba, in the world, the United States government used those circumstances to pressure even more the Cuban into an economic situation that was critical. So I wanted to go back to that. And as I was listening to the presentation of the show, I remember a quote from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he made his speech when the United States, when Pearl Harbor, and he said that that was a day that would live in infamy. And I would say that someday the United States government would have to realize that when that blockade or embargo was signed, that was truly a day that would go down in history as a day that would live in infamy, because that's really trying to have as a memorandum by Undersecretary said, try to make people surrender by having them go through hardships and they even hunger, and that's really, it would go down in history as a day that would be to be remembered as an infamy, really. Now, that said, we make the separation between the actions of the United States government and the different U.S. administrations and the people in the United States that there was the issue that I was talking about at the beginning of my presentation. And we could say that we have thousands of individuals in the United States that realize what has been done to Cuba, and they do all that they can to create consciousness about this issue and to pressure the U.S. government to change the ways in which it deals with Cuba. Some of them are here, as I said before, and I would like them to address the audience. And I think it's not only in the United States; it's in the whole world. We've been witnesses to the caravans that have been going on once a month in different cities throughout the United States and Europe and Latin America, supporting the Cuban struggle and fight against the blockade. And one day, I'm sure that the blockade is going to be lifted, that we will be able to celebrate that victory the same way that we celebrated when the Cuban Five, came back to Cuba. Thanks to the struggle of so many people throughout the world, including many friends in the United States.
Right, and thanks to the Cuban diplomacy and the leadership of the Cuban Revolution, we have to mention that. We just can't not say it. Thank you so much, Fernando. In the meantime, thank you for your optimism. In the meantime, we have to deal with the sanctions. There's no other way, right?
That's right. And our next panelist will address some of those issues. We want to ask him. This is Antonio Carracate, as Cristina mentioned a few minutes ago. In terms of the Chamber of Commerce of Cuba, in terms of foreign trade, the effects we've been talking about, but maybe you can specifically talk about a couple of the issues of the effects on foreign trade of this embargo or blockade against Cuba that's been now for 60 years.
Thank you for inviting us here. I think that our previous speaker, Cosio, explained widely the extraterritorial effect of embargo. And it's very difficult to deepen in this theme, but I would like to complement with some ideas, because one of the purpose, there are some statements that we have a trade with the United States company in some restricted areas such as food and agricultural products. They are they use as a shield in order to divert the real nature of this blockade, which is a very complex system of a dissuasive, punitive measure to intimidate third country, company, bank, as were mentioned by Cosillo. We're aiming at hamper and disrupt the trade and investment relation of those countries with Cuba, and to do that, or by doing that, to suffocate the Cuban economy. He put some samples, and I would like to emphasize in this extraterritorial nature of the embargo with Torricelli Act. It's just one example in 1992, which also was a very opportunist one when Cuba was facing a very complex economic situation, socialist bloc, which prohibits the U.S. subsidiaries worldwide to trade with Cuba. And at that time, a trade volume of around 800 million was abruptly interrupted, mainly in medicine and in food, because we were importing from those companies. And Cuba has to redirect this important supply for a more distant markets, with the corresponding increase in the transportation cost and in the less competitive relation, because, of course, U.S. companies were very competitive. And I would like to emphasize that because these were a very precise act in a very sensitive sector, food and medicine. And then again, we have the Helms-Burton Act, which toughened this its extraterritorial application of the blockade, with the Title III, for instance, which allow former owner of expropriate in Cuban, including Cuban naturalized U.S. citizen, to sue legal and natural person in U.S. courts when they deem that they traffic with their property. And here you've got an article where it's quite difficult to implement, but it's very dissuasive, because even when it is difficult to implement, there are many companies that don't dare to enter a relation with Cuba, avoiding facing problem or trouble with U.S. authority. And I would ask, how much company would come to Cuba to invest, without interested in having business with Cuba, if there wasn't this article? It's a very interesting question. I guess too much more. But I would like to emphasize the dissuasive element of this article. And of course, Cosillo refers the persecution in the financial channels, which is quite important. The banks, the financial institutions are the arteries of trade and investment. And pushing those banks and financial institutions, it creates difficulty for bring out the trade with Cuba. And there are an increasing number of banks reluctant to work with Cuba. And that creates really very difficult in the accomplishing of a trade. And this has been worsening with the inclusion of Cuba in the list of state sponsoring terrorism. So it's one of the most effective measures against trade and investment, this financial channel. But not only that financial channel, we got this particular persecution to operations such oil. And I will let you know the number. It is in the informed report by Cuba in the the fight against the blockade, 27 companies, 54 ships, and 3 individuals were sanctioned because they were dealing with supply of oil to Cuba. That is a precise, effectively particular the measure to have effect in a very sensitive area. That's why we emphasize that the blockade is not for the state structure, for the government. The blockade is for the whole society. And there are no distinction in a state, non-state. The effect and the censure are is being felt in all the sector and for all the people. I would like to state that Chamber of Commerce is an institution committed with the spirit of free trade, and we are open to entering in negotiation, in talks with U.S. company on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and I agree with Fernando that someday this unhuman genocide instrument have to be lifted, and we are open to work with Chamber of Commerce in United States. They have already expressed their stand against the blockade, and I think that we have to fight together.
Thank you so much, Carricarte, for your explanations. We do have a report on this, how specifically in shipbuilders in Cuba, in all this industry, how Cuba is affected by the sanctions in this regard. Let's watch.
To renew the plate, you need certified steel that has to be contracted, and we have had to contract the plates in a very distant market. It can be seen, and that is essentially a product of the blockade.
This is just an example of how difficult maritime and port life becomes for an archipelago like Cuba when it is besieged and limited by the U.S. economic, commercial, and financial. Established 60 years ago, the Caribbean Dry Dock Company shipyard can be accessed by international shipping companies that request any of its services. However, each year there are fewer customers due to the restrictions generated by the blockade, stated Davis Rivero, logistics manager of the shipyard, and Luis Alberto Gonzalez, general director of the Port Maritime Supply Company.
Due to the fear of the application of the Torricelli law, which states that a ship that touches a Cuban port must then spend 180 days without entering the United States, this has resulted in the fact that many vessels have stopped repairing at the shipyard. They have not been planned for repair, directly or negatively influencing the export services of our shipyard.
The fact of the existence of the blockade and the extraterritorial laws it promulgates means that we have to move to distant markets. For example, the markets of Asia, Europe, being able to buy in markets as close as the United States market itself. This makes freight costs to bring these goods more expensive, and their arrivals are delayed.
In June 2010, Cuba was by coercive policies devised from the White House. Thus, the package of 243 measures imposed by then-President Donald Trump arrived with the winds from the north, and the shipping lines that operate cruises were withdrawn, a decision that permeated the port and tourism sector and therefore the national economy. In this regard, the general director of the Port Maritime Supply Company commented.
Our company is the leading company in the country in the provisioning service for foreign ships and cruise ships. And since it does not have the presence of U.S. cruise ships, there's also been a significant reduction in income from the export of services carried out by our company. Another of the damages of the laws of the blockade is that the equipment lines of U.S. origin or from factories that have U.S. components cannot arrive. And sometimes this trade has to be triangulated. International transactions become very difficult. There are banks that can make payments from client shipping lines, but refrain from doing so when there are Cuban banks that could be, for example, in the highly questionable and illegal list of entities that are prohibited by the blockade laws.
In the midst of these restrictions, seafarers are affected. That sailor who becomes popular for the Cuban maritime industry, unlimited contracts by international shipping companies, a measure that, according to Rafael Peraza Santiago, General Director of the Cuban company Selecmar, affects the management of new agreements and the well-being of the Cuban sailor.
For example, in the yacht category, we have a geographical position that annually, it could be said, almost 1 million boats cross our strait here. However, they cannot arrive at our ports as a result of the siege, the persecution, the fear of being fined. Another aspect that equally affects us greatly is the encouragement of emigration.
If the blockade and the measures were more flexible or lifted, it would notably improve the economic life of the country, economic life of our company, and consequently the life of the Cuban family, of our workers.
The throat of an insular country like Cuba is its ports. For them, the economy is oxygenated, the quality of life increases, and society can fully enjoy the privileged geographical position of Cuba in the Greater Antilles. But an anchor persists. The U.S. blockade that massively, flagrantly, and systematically violates the human rights of Cubans. For sailors, port workers, for the people of Cuba in general, 60 years is enough. Let's open the floodgates of understanding and solidarity. Let's respect the sovereignty of peoples.
We're back. Thank you for staying with us here on Radio Havana, Cuba, Cubovisión Internacional, Prensa Latina, and everywhere on the social networks from Havana. On this day, marking the 60th year of the official declaration of the blockade against Cuba, the embargo against Cuba. It's a blockade. And with us we have more panelists here.
Yes.
With us. Cristina?
Yes, we welcome Ana Silvia Rodriguez. Thank you so much for being here. She's the Director of International Organizations of the General Division of Multilateral Affairs and International Law of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And we also welcome Ambassador Jose Ramon Cabañas. Thank you so much for being here. He's the Director of the Center of Research for International Politics, but he has such an interesting experience because he was for 8 years the Cuban ambassador in the U.S., in Washington, in quite interesting years, when we were able to raise our flag again and sing our national anthem right there in a very, very hot, sunny Washington day. So let's start with multilateralism. What a big word. Why is this important, Ed?
We have, as Cristina said, Ana Silvia Rodriguez, who will tell us a little bit about multilateralism and how it relates to the U.S.-imposed blockade against Cuba.
Thank you so much for having me here, and it's a pleasure for me to share this panel with my dear friend, Ambassador Cabañas. As you are aware, for 29 years, Cuba have presented the resolution on the blockade to Cuba. Some people ask us why you are still presenting the resolution if the embargo is still on and is in full force. But we cannot underestimate the political impact of the resolution approved by the General Assembly and the message that it sends the resolution to the international community. In order to put it in context, the General Assembly is by far the universal body of the United Nations where all the membership participate in its work in equal footing. Also, they can express their opinion by through the participation in the debate, but also through their exercise to the right to vote. The General Assembly presents hundreds of resolutions every year that set political precedents, despite and even though they are not political dividing, because this is another issue that people ask us. If they are not political dividing, why you present the resolution? And also the participation of the resolution generates a very rich debate on this issue, where more than 50 countries express their opinion about the blockade imposed to Cuba on their national capacity or presenting groupings. And going back to the resolution presented by Cuba, this is the only resolution that challenged the United States. It's the only resolution in the United Nations that mentioned by their name United States. The resolution also demonstrates, with the approval, with the voting of the resolution, demonstrate the isolation of the United States in the application of its policies against Cuba. And also the resolution shows the support of the Cuban demand in order to put an end to the blockade to Cuba. So for us, it's not an option not to present the resolution every year, because it's going to be inconsistent with the support that every year Cuba receives from the international community, but also it would deprive the world to speak out about this criminal policy that have been reinforced in the last 2 years to a precedent never seen before.
Thank you so much, Ana Silvia. The importance of bringing this debate to New York every year, and the importance of denouncing what the sanctions mean, is something that we can't believe that we can feel tired about this. We have, as diplomats, I've witnessed that, I've covered that. It's impressive the amount of work Cuban diplomats go through in New York or in Geneva or in any important multilateral capital of the world, how much work entails to bring this denounced every year, and how important it is to take there the word and the sufferings of the Cuban people. We also have a video recorded by Gerardo Hernandez. He is a man that has been very vocal, explaining how the sanctions affect this country. He himself was a victim of U.S. policies against. Was in jail for 16 years just for defending the right of the Cuban Revolution to exist, preventing terrorist attacks against this country. He was one of the Cuban Five. He's a remarkable man, a hero walking among us. Now he's in the neighborhoods, everywhere. You can see it in the news shows. He's everywhere, and he was kind enough to record a message for us. Let's listen to Gerardo Hernandez.
Hi, my name is Gerardo Hernandez Nordelo. I'm the National Coordinator of Comités de Defensa de la Revolución, and I'm one of the 5 Cubans that spent 16 years in prison in the U.S. for defending our country against terrorism. I'm 56 years old now, and I don't know what it is to live in a country that has not been blockaded. I was born in a blockade Cuba, and has lived all my life in a country blockaded, suffering the impact, the effects of this hostility coming by from the biggest, stronger country in the world against the ISIS. The blockade is against the government. Now, the blockade is against the Cuban people and affects the same Cuban children, Cuban elderly, Cuban women, Cuban means everybody. Everybody in this country suffers the effect of the blockade and has been suffering the effect of the blockade for 60 years. So you have to ask, why? Why such a craziness? And the response is because they would never forget that we, the Cubans, decided to make a revolution back in 1959 and to take our own path and to build our own country, our own society, according to what the majority of Cubans desire. Because, like it or not, we have a constitution that was approved in a free vote by the broad majority of our population. But they know that if Cuba are able to build the society that Cubans dream of, is going to be a bad example for many other countries in the world, a bad example, an example that the U.S. regime doesn't like. Those incidents that happened in Cuba back in July last year have to do a lot with the blockade, because the desperation of the people, the lack of food in some cases, or the lack of medicine in some cases, or the lack of transportation have to do a lot with the effect of the blockade and the pretensions by that government of the asphyxiation of the Cuban people and the intent of the U.S. to create desperation and needs in the Cuban people. And every Cuban is suffering that. It doesn't matter how you believe. It doesn't matter if you are religious or not, if you believe in God or not, if you are revolutionary or not, if you are from the left, from the right, Muslim, Catholic, everybody in Cuba is suffering the effect of the crazy U.S. blockade.
Thank you so much for staying with us, right, Ed?
Thank you for all of the people here at the Raúl Roa García Higher Institute of International Relations, students who are studying here to become diplomats representing Cuba around the world. And for all of us here, it's a pleasure and honor to be here with so many important people talking about the effects of this crazy economic war, the blockade and the embargo, all in one, all wrapped up in one, now for 60 years officially here against Cuba.
Right. So we have another panelist that has a lot of experience on dealing with, I mean, I do admire diplomats. I wouldn't be able to be a diplomat, to be honest. I'm not that good at that.
Diplomatic, though.
I try, but I have like the principles of being a journalist. You just have to but being a diplomat, I think, is quite hard. And being a Cuban diplomat, dealing with the U.S. officials, which there's a color, a variety of officials to deal with. Jose Ramon Cabañas knows a lot about that and has had quite an interesting experience in suffering as a diplomat and leading a diplomatic headquarters like ours in Washington. Like diplomats not being able to use credit cards or bank accounts, or just because they're Cubans. Or to travel outside, just can't imagine of not living in a specific area of Washington, D.C. How hard it is to be a Cuban diplomat in the U.S.?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. By the way, we do admire journalists, and basically Cuban journalists.
Thank you.
As well.
It's not an easy job either.
Well, I, representing the will of our colleagues, to represent Cuba is a privilege, no matter where you are, when you have to do that, if you're in Africa, the United States, Europe. Now, the conditions in the United States, both in New York and Washington, are a little bit different, but you can still say the same in South America. Being in the United States, well, we have to face some situations that probably Cuban diplomats don't face somewhere else. And you mentioned probably one of them. We remember right before reopening embassies, both in Washington and in Havana, that we were for 15 months without a bank. to conduct our business. I mean, we had to do everything cash, from consular services to pay for electricity or
it's insane in that country.
Anything else. A high volume of I mean, the budget, the amount of money we have to manage. But we made it. And finally, right before the reopening embassies, we found a bank that was, first, they got the license to operate with us, and they provided the service for many years. You have other limitations. Even sometimes people who are allowed to provide the service, but they do believe that still they need a license. And I remember people, I mean, companies who had to make some kind of to our house or our facility, other services. They went to the State Department to ask, am I allowed to do this for Cubans? Because we understand we have an embargo, bloqueo, and we can continue. You mentioned credit cards. Again, it's a practice that is very, very limited. When other panelists were talking about the characteristics of this policy, remember that in New York, New York acts as a clearinghouse and a hub for most of the financial transactions in the world. It's a computerized system, and anything related to Cuba, those 4 letters, it could be our budget, I mean, on both missions, or it could be a payment of Cuban citizens living in the United States for a consular service, and it's frozen immediately, simply because it's related to Cuba. Sometimes we got information from companies who were licensed to operate with Cuba, and still they had difficulties to send a payment, I mean, for transactions on both ways, to send a payment or to receive a payment from a customer. But in this, it's a place where you do face directly the consequences of this policy.
Would you say that would you agree with the statement that this is one of the worst moments between the two countries?
Right now?
Right, yeah, the link between Cuba and the U.S. Would you say it's one of the worst in our history?
You can never compare circumstances. They are different. You have different actors, different moments. If we were able to go back to April 1961, we were invaded. Very difficult. Some people these days compare the situation we are facing in Cuba with the early 90s, when suddenly we lost 85% of our foreign trade. We decreased by 35% in our GNP. I think now we have the expertise. We have dealt with this many times. Here it was mentioned the Torricelli bill, the Helms-Burton legislation. We were able to overcome both of them. I mean, although we have this situation, economically speaking, in Cuba, we are facing the pandemic, all of that, but we do have the confidence that to say, well, we have seen this before. In this room, how many people were born before the blockade was in place? Currently, 70–80% of our population was born after that proclamation. We have here a youth that is able to smile, to love with the blockade and in spite of the blockade and embargo. People creating a family in Cuba every single day. People thinking about the future. No country in the world has that expertise. And that's the price that we know we have to pay simply for living in a country that, it was said before, defend the sovereignty, has its own model. If the United States government like it or not, is the problem, but we do love the project, and we all feel we are part in the project of the kind of society we are building. If that's the price, we regret probably we will meet here in 60 years ahead to talk about the same arguments and the same issues relating to the United States.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm eager to read your book. I'm sure on the announcements on December 17th, 2014 from Washington and Havana. Thank you again for being here. We do have another recorded message, Ed. We were lucky enough to also have another hero, quite interesting. Now he's working, Ramón Labañino, he's working at the National Economist Association of Cuba, and he's been kind enough to also send us a recorded message. Let's listen to him.
My name is Ramón Labañino Salazar, Vice President of the National Association of Economists and Accountants of Cuba. This year, 2021, the embargo has been extremely cruel and criminal with the Cuban people. In a year when we need the help and support and shows of solidarity from all over the world, the most important is this year because we were reaching the amount of 10,000 infected per day because of the pandemic. Well, the U.S. government showing no mercy of any kind whatsoever, or the opposite. They continue kind of some countries who were trying to help and support the Cuban people to fight this disease. In 1 year, the cost of the embargo has reached the amount of $5,500 million. That is between 10 million and 40 million per day. So you can make your calculations, you can make your minds and guess how much more we could have been able to do with that amount of money, how many lives we could have been able to save with that amount of money. Cuba has to invest more than $500 million and more than 5,000 million Cuban pesos to fight the pandemics. So we're in a year when all the support, nothing were coming from the U.S. government. Because this is a criminal and cruel policy, because it's a policy who's trying to that is trying to kill our people by hunger and starvation, and not only that, because they were using the pandemic to kill our people, and they show no mercy of any kind whatsoever. We demand the end of the embargo. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Regardless whether the blockade is still present, we are obliged to jump over it with our own strength, overcome it with our effort, our talent, and the talent of our people. None of us knows more than all of us together. That would be the way to defend our homeland. The homeland is what our parents left us as an inheritance. And that is not a material inheritance. It is not a wealth inheritance. It implies, above all, a commitment.
Well, thank you so much for staying around. We are on social media, on YouTube. A lot of friends around the world are sharing our stream live, and we are on Cuban National Television, we're on Radio Havana, Cuba, and on Internacional, so everywhere in Spanish and English. And we will be on the air until 5:30, and we do still have quite interesting panelists ahead of us. We are marking today the 60th year of the Proclamation 34 by John F. Kennedy, which made official the U.S. blockade embargo on Cuba. And why is this such a big deal, so important for this country? We do have another interesting panelist that we are very, very thankful for having around. and I do think it's an opportunity to listen to him as well, to listen to his voice in this issue. Miguel Barnet is a Cuban writer, novelist, ethnographer, an expert on Afro-Cuban culture topics, and he lived in the U.S., he studied in the U.S., and he's the honorary president of the Cuban National Union Organization of Artists and Writers. You can be speaking like half an hour of his curriculum. We don't have that amount of time, but we really thank Miguel Barnet, an artist, a respected writer in this country. Thank you for being here. And I know you have written what you have to say to us. What has been the Cuba-U.S. relation and how hard it's been for the two countries together for you in your life? How do you see this issue?
Well, thank you very much, or so much, for giving me the opportunity to talk in this panel with such celebrities, important people that are aware of the damage that this embargo or blockade has made to the Cuban people. Some friends that spoke before me said they were born with the blockade. Well, I was born in 1940. I can also say that I was born with a blockade, because in a way, the Cuban country has always been blockaded by the United States. If we go back to our history, the 19th century, when we finished the war against the Spanish regime, the colonial regime, in 1901, we had our first constitution. And in this constitution, there was an amendment by Senator Platt, Platt Amendment, that in a way, in a very strong way, didn't allow us to establish a real sovereign and free republic with our aims, with our principles, with our dreams. That amendment was stopped like in 1924, 26, I don't remember exactly. But it also caused a great damage to the sensibility of people, to the psychology of the Cuban people. So to a certain extent, we have always been subjectively blockaded, psychologically blockaded by the presence not of the American people, because we love the American people. We have to be grateful to all the contributions that the American people, especially the American artists, brought to the Cuban culture in terms of jazz, in terms of literature, etc. But the American administrations, they never accepted Cuba to be a free country, a totally free country. So I think the blockade is correct to call it a blockade, has been a big disease, more than a virus. And the only way to heal that disease is the cry of freedom and culture and art. So I am very proud to be able to be like a bridge or a liaison, as I'm going to read here, with the United States always, because the contribution that we had from the United States and the contribution the United States had from us in terms of music and literature is enormous, it's huge, it's big. And no one can wipe off that from the history of Cuba.